Greetings, everyone. My name is Graham Walker, president of Patrick Henry College. I'm pleased to welcome you to the last session, at least this week, of our Newsmaker interview series with World Magazine editor-in-chief Marvin Olasky. It's a privilege to have Dr. Olasky on our faculty because he brings persons of considerable repute to our campus, and also because he's an extraordinarily good teacher. A number of our students are working with him, learning the craft of writing and reporting. A lot of aspiring journalists are in our student body, and so that's an important reason to have this event today. You may know that Marvin Olasky has quite a reputation beyond being a journalist and beyond World Magazine. He also was the author of the influential book, The Tragedy of American Compassion, also Compassionate Conservatism, written many monographs and articles on public policy issues, and so we're thrilled to have him on our faculty. We're also happy today that we are joined not only by those who are in our live audience, but also those tuning in via our live webcast, and the some 400,000 readers of World Magazine who will enjoy the fruits of your labor today in the written version, which will appear later, I think both on paper and online, if I'm not mistaken. So we have a larger audience than it may appear in person. Today, we have a journalist with us, Mark Leibovich, who has quite a career behind him, and I'm looking forward to learning a bit more about it. He worked at the San Jose Mercury News and the Boston Phoenix before spending 9 years at the Washington Post, where he served as the leading political writer in the style section. He's known for his profiles on political and media figures, and most recently his book titled, "This Town, Two Parties and a Funeral, Plus Plenty of Valet Parking in America's Gilded Capital." His controversial book hit bookstores in July and exposes life inside the Beltway. It's not a flattering picture. He writes that D.C. is a city ruled by money and a place where status is determined by who you know and what they can do for you. He's won many journalism awards, including the 2011 National Magazine Award for his profile of Politico's Michael Allen. Washingtonian magazine has labeled him as the reigning master of the political profile. The New Republic described Leibovich as one of Washington's 25 most powerful yet least famous people. And the Atlantic's Jeffrey Goldberg nominated him as Washington's most important journalist. He lives in Washington, D.C. with his wife and 3 daughters. Please welcome Mark Leibovich and Marvin Olasky.
Well, Mark, thank you for coming. And since Graham mentioned the craft of writing, let me start out by asking, how did you learn the craft of writing?
Through great pain and suffering, as any honest writer will tell you.
Yeah.
That's a good question. I mean, I guess I just learned it by doing. I mean, I spent a long time of my career just in the wilderness and in jobs I didn't particularly like, and I was a pretty good writer in high school, I guess, in college, and you sort of learn how to write papers and things and get you through. I mean, I never had any great engineering skills or science skills or math skills or anything like that, so I guess that's what I fell into. But I think in journalism, it's very important to listen to people, to not be afraid to make mistakes, not be afraid to just experience the world and hope, and don't expect it to be easy. I mean, there are a lot of reporters that I've known over the years who like to pretend that it's easy and who think it's easy, and there's a level of, I think, arrogance that sort of comes with that. They just sort of write it and they close it and they sort of know the truth and that's it. My approach has always been much more staccato and much more, I would say, pain-based, as my wife can attest to, especially in the process of writing This Town, which was a pretty long and anxiety-ridden process. But yeah, I wish there were a magic formula, because I would have signed up for it a long time ago. So.
Now, did you work, when you went to University of Michigan, did you write for the Michigan Daily?
I didn't, no. I actually wrote 2 stories for the Michigan Daily on the University of Michigan soccer club my freshman year, and I couldn't stand the editor. He was one of the biggest jerks I'd ever met, and it turns out I sat next to him in San Jose as soon as I got there in 1994, and he actually became a decent friend. He's not there anymore, but he's a good guy. I told him that he almost turned me off to journalism for life, and he said, "You should have taken the favor when I was offering it." So Barry is now out of journalism.
Did you go into journalism right after college?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, I needed a job, frankly, and I was answering a bunch of want ads, and I didn't know what I wanted to do. And I just needed some way to pay the bills and my rent, and so I got this job at the Boston Phoenix, which is a sort of an alternative weekly in Boston, and I was answering phones for years, and I knew I didn't want to stay there, but they weren't paying me any. I mean, they were paying me a minimal amount, and eventually I sort of began listening to conversations, and they began letting me write stories, and eventually I decided, hey, maybe I can do this for a living. And 4 or 5 years later, I was still making about maybe $18,000 a year, which was not a lot even back then. And I was 27, 28 years old, and I set out for California with my eventual wife, and got a job out there, and next thing I know, life was happening, and I was a journalist. So.
And then you go back to the East Coast?
We came back to the East Coast in 1997. I got a job as a business reporter at the Washington Post, and then I became a political reporter in 2002, and then went to the New York Times in 2006, mainly as a political reporter. And I moved to the Times Magazine full-time last summer. Well, not this last summer, this last summer of 2012. So.
And just looking at some of the reviews of the book from the New Republic, brutally incisive, but not without pathos. What does that mean? Does that make you a compassionate conservative?
Sure, why not? No, I don't know. I mean, the reviews have been, I think, mostly pretty good. I mean, but they've been all over the map. I mean, one thing you realize when you write a book, and I'm sure you realized this long before I did, is that people review the book they wish you had written instead of the book that you, in fact, wrote. But look, I mean, I think the biggest challenge of journalism, a journalist in general, is to keep an extremely open mind before every single story, and resist as hard as you can to get into the groupthink and the orthodoxy of what the conventional wisdom is. And part of why I wrote this book is because I wanted to write about the sort of incubator for the conventional wisdom that governs big parts of public opinion. We were just talking about this. And so, yeah, I mean, I don't mind being counterintuitive. I don't mind making people uncomfortable. I think there are a lot of uncomfortable truths in Washington that I wanted to, I don't know if expose is the right word because it sounds too muckrakery, but I wanted to start what might have been a difficult conversation for people, because I think the disconnect between the level of distrust and dissatisfaction out in the country for Washington right now with the level of self-satisfaction and decadence inside of Washington right now is unsustainable and frankly perverse, and I wanted to give people a sense of what this world had come to look like in a fuller sense of what's usually described.
Now, you mentioned groupthink. A lot of observers from Timothy Krause back in 1972, The Boys in the Bus. So 40 years, a lot of people have said there's a huge amount of groupthink that goes on, and often of an ideological cast. Not that there's a conspiracy, but just common ways of perceiving things. Right. Do you see that, or?
I think so. I mean, I think Washington itself is a tiny town, right? It is a town in which everyone, I mean, there are certainly tribes within the town. I mean, there are the Democrats and the Republicans and the journalists and the lobbyists and what have you. But no, I mean, Timothy Krause was writing about a tiny world, which was the bus, the bubble of a group of campaign reporters and political operatives on the 1972 presidential campaign. But no, I mean, I think when people talk to the same 30 people every day, as many people who cover Washington do, and many people who work in Washington on either side do, it does nourish just a bunch of assumptions, whether it's, America's not ready for a black president, or there are weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, or the country is moving to the left. I mean, I think that these are all just assumptions that are bred by the same conversation and in the same echo chamber. And one of my favorite parts of my job is just leaving town and sort of trying to transcend that echo chamber and listen to other perspectives.
One other question before I start going through the book here a little bit with you. According to forward.com, I mean, the Jewish Forward, basically said you're a member of Adas Israel, a conservative congregation in the Tony, Washington neighborhood of Cleveland Park. And then the writer said, I haven't seen him bring it up much, but it doesn't seem faked either.
It doesn't seem fake.
Doesn't seem faked.
Oh, I guess that's good, right?
I guess that's good. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's. I think it's genuine. Well, I hadn't seen that particular one, but no, it's. I don't think it's fake.
But there is a lot of fakery in Washington.
No. Faith is often used as a political pose and a social climbing pose in Washington. I think in a very writ large kind of way. I mean, one of the things the congregation I belong to is a very, I'm sure, status-minded congregation, and I talked to the rabbi a lot about this, and sort of juxtaposing the status-minded congregation of his synagogue with the secular status-minded congregation of Washington, D.C., and people use faith, almost as a talking point sometimes. They talk about, God telling them to run for president. They talk about things. They tend to use faith where it suits their political argument or their political. It's a very narrow way of sort of using faith. Anyway, I have definitely found that, and one of the reasons in the book I start at the funeral of Tim Russert in 2008, and Tim was a pretty religious Catholic, and I was just struck by all the invocations of God in a lot of the tributes. They were talking about, well, up in heaven's green room, people are now watching Tim, and God, they were just talking about what God would want and how God produced a rainbow after the funeral in tribute to Washington and to Tim and the moment, and I just thought it was ridiculous.
How do you discern what's genuine and what's faked?
I guess just instincts. I sort of look for people's actions. I get to know people over time. I tend to be skeptical. I tend to be cynical, actually, and I think it's hard to be a reporter in Washington without becoming cynical, because you are spoken to in the language of obsequiousness, in the language of spin, frankly, in the language of flat-out lies. Neither party, neither side has any monopoly on that. So, yeah, I'm cynical, but I do think that this book and what I do comes from a place of idealism and hoping that the country and the people who run it are moving to a better place, and that we can do better. So.
Okay. Let me just ask you about a few things here, and you can just exegete at will.
Sure.
It's a nice line here. Formers, that is the former Secretary of State or the former this or the former that, formers stick to Washington like melted cheese on a gold-plated toaster.
It's true. Our founders sort of imagined a capital where people would go and they would serve, and then they would return to their communities and they would immerse themselves in the farm or in their medical practice or in their general store or what have you. Now people just stay. And once you've been elected to, say, the Senate, or once you get a plum White House position, or once you get something that gets you on TV and can sort of build a brand, people see it as a ticket to be punched for life, in which you can just sort of continue to trade on whatever this designation was, and you just stay in Washington. People always run against Washington. They talk about how awful of a swamp it is, and then they just settle into the place. And I guess 50% of all U.S. senators, once they're voted out, stay in Washington now to become lobbyists. That compares to, I think, about 3% in 1974, which to me is a statement about being elected to an entire class of people, to an entire culture of politics set in Washington, as opposed to serving, remaining true to yourself, and then returning to your community. So.
You mentioned about Barack Obama provided a shot of adrenaline and ignited the hottest local media swoon since Camelot. Camelot referring to the John F. Kennedy administration. Okay, so these are reporters who are supposed to be skeptical, and as you say, are often cynical. Why the swoon?
Why the swoon? I think he was new. He was exciting.
But Ted Cruz is new and exciting in a way.
There's a swoon for Ted Cruz in certain sectors of the media. Well, listen, Ted Cruz is being largely sustained by the conservative media. Now, look, I think I can't say for sure. I don't know what's in the hearts of the people. I think what people would suspect is that it's emblematic of a left-leaning perspective on the part of the political press. I don't know if that's true or not, but I certainly thought that he, certainly in that campaign, received disproportionately, I guess, easier coverage. I mean, they just didn't find much on him. So.
Yeah. Let's see. Now, a lot of students here are interested in politics and have ambitions in Washington. Mm-hmm. So let me ask you about this. Eager to please crossing guard types are certainly drawn to Washington in large proportions. Lone wolves don't do as well here as in the Wild West of Wall Street or Genius Labs of Silicon Valley. So the personality needed to be successful in Washington is what?
I don't know if needed is the right word, because
okay.
obviously a lot of types can thrive there and succeed there. But I think that there is, again, I keep thinking about the language of obsequiousness and,
okay.
and the pleasing impulse and the, I mean, one of the working titles for the book for a while was Suck Up City, which, can you say that here?
Yeah, I guess you have.
I guess, okay, sorry.
Of course, there is a chapter in the book, too.
It is, yeah, so, sorry, I guess it's out there. No, but I did not want to name it that because I have young kids and my wife thought it would be too in your face and so forth. But no, I mean, I think that the notion of pleasing people and sort of seeing your path charted by the people you need to please rather than the self you need to nourish and respond to and get to know. And a lot of people, especially after this book has come out, they say, look, I want to serve. I mean, I want to serve the country. I want to come to Washington. I've always had this romantic view of it. And what I'm starting to tell people is it's probably a good idea, if you can, to start elsewhere. I mean, to sort of get to know either a part of the country or a group of people who operate from a different perspective, or failing that, make sure you know yourself and have a fuller sense of what your values are and what you're there for and who, and what you want to accomplish, rather than sort of throwing yourself into this stew of opportunism, which Washington can be. So the type that, I mean, again, the crossing guard type is sort of, I would say, it's kind of a archetypical type, but I mean, I think it exists. I mean, you've been in Washington, you certainly see them. I've never been that. I've always been sort of the wise guy in the back of the class, sort of skeptical of everything.
And then you mentioned it has never been easier for, and these are in quotation marks, strategists and consultants and agents of all stripe to affix themselves like barnacles to the local money barge, sucking in green nutrients. So is it, if there are talk about, well, let's have this reform bill or things like that, is any of that realistic as long as there's so much money, so much power there? Aren't folks going to come to where the money is?
I think they will, and I think that that's a huge problem now. And I think people say what's different now than was true 20 years ago. I mean, there have always been greedy and opportunistic, and ambitious types drawn to Washington, obviously. What's different now is that there is just so much money in the political system, and Washington is by far the wealthiest metropolitan area in the United States now. I mean, it's home to 7 of the 10 wealthiest counties in the United States. I mean, the local economy did not hiccup at all during the recession in the rest of the country. I mean, maybe a little bit, but yeah, but it's now possible. I mean, once you're there, I mean, you can cash in any number of different ways. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean illegally cash in at all, but it just sort of creates a level of greed that wasn't supposed to, be driving people to come into politics. And the other part of it is just vanity, which the new media culture has really, I think, nurtured, because, again, 20 years ago, not everyone, there was no Twitter feed for you or I to have, or Facebook account or YouTube thing. I mean, it's never been easier to develop a public profile. It used to be a much smaller, frankly elitist, but I mean, it was much smaller, and it was just much more discerning group, and now it's a much bigger pie of easy fame, and I think that often nurtures the worst part of people's instincts.
you talk about how the Obama presidency became a full-time employment service for former journalists. A reported 19 would join the administration through its first term. The revolving door, should that be stopped? Is there a way to stop it?
Now, you mean like reporters going into administrations, or just people leaving administrations and going into lobbying and so?
Reporters, there used to be a sense of, well, if you're a reporter, here's a certain ethic.
Yep.
You know, you're not going to go over to the dark side.
Yep.
And do public relations lobbying and so forth. That seems to be gone.
I find it depressing. I mean, every time, and the number's bigger now. I mean, since that book was, I wrote that, I think, right around the second inauguration, and the, I mean, there's been another wave. I mean, Richard Stengel, the editor of Time, just got a high-level job at the State Department for Secretary Kerry. Yeah, no, I mean, look, it's happened a lot the last few years. It happened, I mean, it happened in the Bush administration, it happened in the Clinton administration to some degree, but much more now. And look, I mean, the proof is in the pudding. I mean, part of me, I guess, just sort of cringes every time that happens, because it makes it harder for those of us still on this side of the fence to convince people who are skeptical that we don't have an agenda, and we're not looking for the next job inside the administration and so forth. And not to mention it in the case of Obama, I mean, it nourishes everyone's worst suspicions about the press being completely in bed with Obama and favoring him. And so, yeah, I mean, I'm not going to defend that. It's just, I think it's an unfortunate fact, an unfortunate trend that journalists still on the other side have to contend with.
You do have great lines here. The extreme hype that attended the Obama invasion went well beyond even the historic impact of his election. It bordered at times on out-and-out panting. So, anyway, that's good. But then the Obama followers were determined to resist being sucked up by the seductions.
Yeah.
They offered themselves as incorruptible canaries that would fly above the filthy flattery minds of D.C. They would refuse to play. They would stay humble and focused on their work. Well, what's happened?
They failed. I mean, to be perfectly blunt. I mean, I don't know if that was a good marketing strategy in 2008. It certainly sounded compelling. The country seemed to be receptive to it at the time. But look, I mean, in retrospect, these were, most of the people who put this campaign together were people who live in Washington, who are political insiders, who have been through any number of, campaigns and packaging and messaging efforts. And maybe that was just the flavor of the month, and it got them there. And no, I mean, I don't know if the president is or was sincere, but I mean, you have, the proof is in the pudding. I mean, these people often just sort of stay, and they run against lobbying and say no lobbyists in the White House, and then all of a sudden we're making an exception over here and an exception over here and an exception over here. And so, yeah, nothing changes. So I don't know. I mean, it's, again, I think the president himself has said that his inability to change anything has been one of his biggest failures. I honestly don't know how hard he tried.
You have a very interesting profile here of Harry Reid, and you mentioned that Reid rarely wastes his powers of persuasion on policy arguments or charm offensives. He goes straight to, what do you want?
He does.
So what's happening now in the shutdown? Because right now, it doesn't seem that the bargaining is going on. How do you see Reid functioning in this?
I don't know. I mean, I think Reid thinks, Reid's about winning and losing. I mean, this is not an ideological argument for him. It's not, in this case,
But he's not saying, what do you want, it seems.
No, he's not. But I think in the context of what do you want there, he was talking about what do you want for you to vote for us in this particular bill. I mean, I think the quote you had was from Susan Collins, who's a moderate Republican. And I think he was probably, or she was probably talking about, what do you want? I mean, what do you want for me to get you to vote for the stimulus bill or the health care bill or what have you. So, I think Reid and Obama and Pelosi think they have a winning hand now, and I think public opinion is on their side, and there's no need to negotiate. So.
You also have a really interesting profile of Tom Coburn. And you mentioned that Coburn regularly refers to an essay that I suspect a lot of y'all have read by C.S. Lewis on the inner ring. And you're just noting here, politicians become obsessed with the inner ring, the place where decisions are made, where one is privy to the information that allows them to be in the know. So that's politicians. But it seems that journalists in Washington also desperately want to be not observing the inner ring with the front row at the circus, but right in the inner ring.
It seems, I mean, look, there's an ethic, and I would broaden this from journalists in general, but I mean, certainly journalists are not, I mean, are prime offenders. I mean, to be inside, I mean, to be an insider is itself an easily available snack food. It is something that titillates. I mean, Coburn would say that it becomes addictive. I mean, he compares the power and, I mean, the inner ring to a morphine addiction. I mean, he, and there are other parts and other people who have compared the experience of being an altar boy to being in the inner ring and sort of seeing the inner sanctum at work and just sort of becoming intoxicated by that, and then having the same sensation when they're in politics and they want to be behind the door where decisions are made or know what the drama is. So, no, I mean, I think as Coburn said to me, and he still says it now, it makes men and women do bad things to get inside the inner ring. And I mean, I think journalists, you know, probably, I mean, there's a level of access journalism in Washington that goes on and that you have to be very, very careful about, I think.
Yeah. Now, in the book, you really, you don't go into ideology a whole lot, but you do say this town leans left and assumes like-mindedness, so it tends to be especially tough on its own if respect is not paid. Mm-hmm. So, leaning left, a lot of the students here are politically conservative. Mm-hmm. And they're coming at this from evangelical principles. Mm-hmm. What room is there for them in a town that leans so far left? And again, there's room certainly in congressional staffs and Republican things, but as far as media.
Right. Well, I mean, there's also, it's conservative, and you know, there's media for this. Right. I think the point. I knew you were going to read that passage. I've gotten in all kinds of trouble for that passage, and it shouldn't be there. No, I mean, I think it's true. I mean, look at the voting records. I mean, look how the District of Columbia votes. I mean, look, I mean, I live in Northwest Washington. I don't know a lot of evangelical conservatives in my neighborhood. It's a fact. I don't know of any in my newsroom. It's a fact. I mean, there could be this completely secretive world that exists that doesn't talk to me, but I just haven't seen it. So, look, I know a lot of deeply religious people who live in Washington or around Washington. They're in politics, and like, I mean, you'd have to talk to them about, you know, whether they feel like outsiders here. But I think I'm just trying to speak honestly about the world that I'm covering. And yeah, I mean, I don't mind getting heat for this, but it's a fact of, I mean, I think it just seems to be my impression for someone who lives there and who wrote this book as an insider.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the honesty, and it's a good book for y'all to read. For many decades, journalists were considered the freezer-burned broccoli of the D.C. buffet spread, compared with the caviar of the caviar politicians, diplomats, and lawyers of influence. So
Washington puts the me in media, I think was another it's true.
Yeah. So journalists now have a higher position.
I don't know if now, but yeah, no. I mean, Washington has always had a special place at the dinner table. Not always, but for reporters. I mean, ever since All the President's Men, you know, became this best-selling book, and you know, hit motion picture, and Robert Redford played Bob Woodward, and Carl Bernstein played Dustin Hoffman. I mean, there's been this rock star appeal of the journalist, and that kind of gave rise to this incredible cult of investigative reporting in the 70s. I wasn't around then. I was, but I wasn't here then. And I mean, since then, I mean, journalists have sort of moved on to TV, right? I mean, it's become the gold standard of my industry is no longer reporting and fairness and objectivity. It's punditry, right? I mean, if you can get noticed by yelling louder than the other guy on TV, you're going to make a name for yourself and get recognized in airports and get big speaking fees. And I mean, that's where I guess the rewards are now. But no, I mean, I think there seem to be a disproportionate number of reporters, journalists who show up at these parties and who are relishing their own role in the carnival.
One specific example, the reversal of President Obama on super PACs, political action committees. And you mentioned that Obama's super PAC reversal brought a few days of predictable indignation from the right over his hypocrisy and hand-wringing from the left over his impurity. But after everyone got over their shock and outrage, this town celebrated the flip-flop. It was not only foreseen, but great for business. So, is anything that's great for business then acceptable? The more power comes to Washington, the more money comes to Washington. That's actually great for business, right?
If it comes to Washington.
If it comes to Washington.
Not necessarily a small business owner in in Lubbock, Texas,
right.
but I
mean, for the business of journalists and media people and consultants in Washington.
Sure. I mean, people can decry this all they want, but I mean, how many? There's a figure in there, I don't remember it, but hundreds of millions of dollars came flowing to a lot of the media companies and and strategists who are paid directly by these super PACs in many cases. So. Yeah, I mean, one of the biggest disconnects there again is economic, and you sort of wonder who's working for who and what job they have their eye on, whether it's the job they are elected to do or what might come next. So,
let's see. We'll go to your questions in just a couple of minutes, but a few things more I cannot resist. What's some vocabulary that we should know? You have an interesting page where you talk about. Brokerage employees referring to ordinary investors as Muppets, flight attendants deriding infrequent leisure flyers as Clampets from the Beverly Hillbillies, rail attendants dismiss excited train hobbyists as foamers, political consultants refer to rich self-funded candidates as checkbooks. What else is there in the vocabulary that these future journalists and political folks should know that isn't an ordinary?
Well, I mean, the larger point you're making and I was making here is that, frankly, I mean, Washington is a city that has big parts of it have a great deal of contempt for its customers, whether they're voters or viewers of the TV ads they're making and so forth. And the hook for this was a large feature piece in Politico, which is a very popular political website that ran during the Republican primaries in late in 2011, and it talked about it. Actually, the headline was "Are Voters Stupid?" and it had a picture of Forrest Gump, and I could not believe that they would be so out front with this level of arrogance about how they viewed the American voter. But I thought, I mean, one of the things that was interesting about this is Politico is the engine of the Beltway sensibility, and I thought what that reflected was how many people, whether they're in media buying or politicians themselves, sort of see the consumers. I mean, and they see them as, in many ways, just these pawns to be manipulated, these numbers to be herded onto their side, whether it's buying ads or believing their nonsense. So I just thought that was an incredibly transparent moment that I wanted to capture and sort of flesh out a little bit.
Okay. I suspect there are questions here from pawns who do not like being manipulated.
Yes.
Who wants to ask? See, there's...
Hi. It seems like from your book and from other things that we hear about Washington that all of the incentives to do good run the wrong way, right? So what hope is there that Washington will ever change, or will it keep on getting worse and worse and worse and worse and finally blow up?
I mean, look, that's a fantastic question. I think the first part of your question about the incentives is just spot on. I mean, right now the incentives are geared towards easy publicity, easy money, and easy sort of careerism, to use Tom Coburn's word, that frankly gets farther and farther divorced from the founder's original notion of service and also, again, serving your community ultimately. They had no conception of just perpetuating this class. I don't think this disconnect is sustainable. The disconnect meaning the level of utter revulsion from outside of Washington for what's going on inside of Washington, and the continued level of frankly, arrogance inside and disconnect inside. And look, I mean, I do think that the country is quite receptive now to a pure outsider perspective, whether it's a third-party candidate, whether it's someone who does not play by any of these rules, who just, can somehow break free of the political speak and just the language of ads and the language of spin, and bring us to a better place. I mean, this is usually the part of the conversation where I throw up my hands and say, hey, I'm just a journalist. I'm holding a mirror to the culture, and I'll leave it to someone else with the solutions. But I don't, I mean, look, it's, this argument, in so much as I have one, keeps getting made for me every single day by what's going on in the news. So, I mean, Washington, for as unhappy a place as it should be, does seem to be doing quite well for itself still, for whatever reason. That's why it's such a pleasure to be out here.
What do you think of the media's coverage of the shutdown?
Of the shutdown? Well, I don't know if there's a lot to talk about. I mean, first of all, there's just not a lot of, there's no negotiations going on. I mean, I think that there's been a fair amount of, there seems to be a lot of focus on the Republicans' internal bickering at this point. I don't know if there's an overemphasis on some point in any way, but I mean, people are portraying the sort of Cruz Tea Party perspective that supposedly is driving this thing as increasingly isolated, and you keep hearing reports of Republicans rebelling against Cruz and Boehner sort of caving a little bit. There's been a lot of that, but to be perfectly blunt, this is going to sound like a cop-out. I've been traveling like a maniac the last few days, and I haven't read it that closely except for the tip sheets. But what's your sense? Oh.
Just my follow-up question. Whenever I open the news, the headlines are almost humorous. They'll say things about bickering between people, or
About what? I'm sorry.
Bickering between the parties, or Obama refuses to back down and says this is going to be the end, or something. So I guess kind of a broader question, what do you think of the media's need to, it almost feels like it's a gossip column, like what do you think of that in general?
Yeah,
issues like that?
I mean, I think the media in general has absolutely been given over to the process of politics and the chess game of politics, and almost, I mean, there's no discussion. I mean, I'm not hearing a lot of discussion about the merits of Obamacare or the merits of of Ted Cruz's argument or what have you. I mean, people look at polls and they perceive that the shutdown is disproportionately being blamed on Republicans, and therefore Republicans are getting nervous. So, I mean, again, this is process. This is not the substance of what's being argued or not argued.
so how would you recommend that journalists change? How do we get away from sensational journalism when nothing is really communicated to more substantive information?
It's a great question. I would like to think that the marketplace will demand a kind of journalism that is more thoughtful, that is more issues-based, that is more, frankly, open-minded beyond this sort of groupthink that Marvin was talking about. And again, hopefully bringing the conversation to a more truthful place. I'm just one person. I don't think there's a lot of satisfaction with the media, and I mean, just like there isn't with the two major parties at this point. But the media is not terribly good at looking in the mirror. And one thing I've found in writing this book, which is quite critical of the media, is that there's probably no thinner-skinned group of people than members of the news media. And when you criticize them, as I did, I mean, you're going to hear about it, and people are going to get defensive, and that's actually been more true of the reporters in here than the politicians in here. So that doesn't quite answer your question. In fact, it doesn't come close to answering your question, because my real answer is I don't know. But I would just hope that it's moving in a good direction. And look, I think an honest conversation about it is a place to start, and I tried to do that, in this book. I'm not the most popular guy in Washington right now, I don't think.
But you're looked upon as one of the powers, and so the kissing up has to.
Yeah, I guess I'm just trying not to pay attention to it, and again, I've had the luxury of being out of town a lot. So.
Hi there. As a journalism student, I feel like the journalism profession, like more than any other career, is immersed, and the job of the journalist is to be immersed in the world, right? Because that's what you're supposed to be reporting on.
Yes.
And so much of that is negative and dark and just depressing when you look at it. I don't know if you've ever felt that way. That would be my question. Have you ever felt that way? And if so, how do you cope with that both personally and in your reporting? And has that ever dissuaded you from writing a story or from potentially picking a different career, changing tracks? How do you deal with the negativity of the world since that's your job?
Yeah, it's a terrific question. I mean, I will say, in full disclosure, I don't have a hard job at all. I mean, I talked about politics. I go out and I cover political stuff. I look through the world from, I mean, if I were a war correspondent, if I were, in a completely impoverished part of the world, just immersed in some very real life or death, pain and struggle and anguish, I would be a better person to talk to. But I think, from my perspective, the world that most journalists I know choose to immerse themselves in is the world of Washington. And I gave a speech up in New Hampshire at a college a couple weeks ago, and a young reporter from the Concord Monitor up in New Hampshire said, I'm 25 years old, I really want to go to Washington, and all these people at these fancy websites like Politico and BuzzFeed, they have this incredible profiles, and it looks like they're having so much fun, and I'm getting restless. I mean, what should I do? And I was like, look, stay in the world. I mean, Concord, New Hampshire is a much, I think, nicer and truer version of the world, and you're meeting a much more just a real, I mean, it's a small town, like a lot of small towns, but resist the immersion in the echo chamber that we're talking about for as long or as hard as possible, because the echo chamber is not going to get you to the truth in many cases, right? And frankly, the world is broad, and the world is very painful, and it's a lot less comfortable out in the world than it is in Washington. I mean, Washington is one of the most comfortable places in the world, and it shouldn't be. And one of the reasons I wrote this book is because I wanted to introduce some discomfort into the system and into the insider class. So, I don't know. I mean, I think that's part of our responsibility to readers, to be awake to that perspective.
When the kind of investigative journalism that you did on this book and taking a deep dive in writing a book like that could attract a significant audience. And I'm just wondering now, as a former journalist myself, the impact of social media, and just seems like the shortened attention spans of so many readers now and what they're even looking for in journalism. Is that type of work by a journalist, is that becoming a thing of the past? And do you sense that you are doing some good in writing this, and that people are going to take the time to read that and it's going to have an impact? Because as a journalist, that's kind of what you're wanting, it to have an impact. Yeah. What about the audience out there right now?
Well, I mean, it's been gratifying in the case of this book. I mean, it's sold a lot of copies. I mean, it's been on the Times bestseller list for 10 weeks, and that's great. I mean, most political books don't sell at all outside of Bob Woodward and maybe some campaign books and some hot memoirs. So, no, I mean, I think there's a challenge to break through. I mean, I think the challenge of the marketplace is to hopefully synthesize the depth with something that people want to read. And I didn't do this intentionally, but there's this big sort of intrigue-based, titter-tatter-based, obsession with this book in Washington, because I wanted to know who I was criticizing, and I wanted to know, who's up and who's down. And I purposely didn't include an index in the back of this book. There's this thing called the Washington Read, where people in Washington will often instinctively go to the index first, see if their name is mentioned, then immediately, if they're not mentioned or not mentioned significantly, we'll slam the book shut and not buy it. So I wanted people to actually read the book. But of course, 2 days after this came out, the Washington Post ran a online index of every single person who was mentioned. So that sort of undermined the process. And But no, I mean, so you've had this, again, this disconnect inside of Washington. People have read this sort of as a gossip, as sort of a game of chess, or sort of, who comes out looking best, who won the book, who lost the book. And then outside of D.C., you've had a much more thoughtful read, and it's been a combination of people who say they are entertained by this and have enjoyed reading it, but also who are disgusted by the picture I drew. And I think that's probably an appropriate response. I mean, I'm thrilled that people are reading it, so that's good.
I suspect its main use for many people will be as a guide to who I should talk with and so forth.
I really hope that's not true, but it wouldn't surprise me. I mean, I've actually gotten quite a few emails from people saying, how would you see as what's a guide to like making it in DC? And I see your book as a place to start. And I'm like, please don't. But whatever. People are going to read it as they're going to read it.
So you have a story coming out of the New York Times Magazine about Miguel Cabrera.
Yes, it's a sports piece. I'm taking a nice break from politics for a few weeks, few months, and I have a baseball story that's in this Sunday's Times Magazine on the Detroit Tigers and Miguel Cabrera, and so I'm it's I can get yelled at by a whole other group of people, baseball fans, but no, it's a nice break. So I like sports.
Yeah, a few weeks or a few months now. When you write a sentence like this, it's always the same people in the same movie playing the same roles for this year's crop of self-fashioned outsiders. Election day as Groundhog Day. So you sound tired of the whole thing.
I am a little tired of the whole thing. I'm a lot tired of the whole thing.
Yeah.
That's why I wrote this book. I wanted to shake up, this world a little bit. I am tired of it, but I continue to be fascinated by it, in part because there's look, it's about the country. I mean, it's about the people in it, and I define what I do less about the tiresome scenes that I'm describing here than I do about, hopefully, the people that allegedly are being served or ill-served, in our gilded capital. And that could be just a rationalization, and I might, jump back into the swamp, and try to write political pieces again and just say, I just can't do this. But I'm going to try. I still care about politics. I think it's important. I think, I don't know, maybe it's a disease, but...
I'm just thinking that David Halberstam would write policy books, and then he would write baseball books. So
right. Maybe I'll write a baseball book.
Take a sabbatical.
I would love to write a baseball book. That would be really, really, really fun. You might not hear from me politically in a few years. Now, look, I'm sure I'd be very happy, although I have to say, my time in the inner ring of the Detroit Tigers clubhouse and just that whole insider culture, you do realize that it does apply to any number of universes, and there's a pecking order of the beat writers and the star players and so forth.
Right.
And this is not a pure world either. So.
Yeah. Other questions?
Yeah.
I don't want to. I'm not a journalist major, but I'm really interested in politics. You said something back a little while ago in a heavy book that came out.
Thank you. Yeah.
That you see a lot of frustration out in the general populace. Do you think there's enough dissatisfaction and frustration in the, let's call it, voting electorate to make any significant changes in the way Washington is run, and the people who run it?
Yeah. That's really the only power people have. I think there's always been a hungering for. There's always been. Dissatisfaction has always been very, very powerful, and it produced Barack Obama. You could argue. Because he presented himself as the compelling answer to wherever the country was in 2008. Ronald Reagan. It's just, outsiders always run for office, and then what I'm trying to write about is like what happens once you're inside and how you get co-opted and how that world becomes the consuming and defining element of one's life. Look, I think a lot of it depends on the candidate. I think you need to attach a compelling voice to and a compelling message to a moment in time, and whether that voice is on the left or on the right, I think that the country is absolutely receptive to it. It's just a question of who can speak to it. I mean, again, that sounds like a vague answer, but I think the country is absolutely ready to change course in some way. I just don't know what that way is. So. At winning the presidency or making a difference? Well, I mean, I think Ted Cruz is quite obviously going to run for president. I mean, it seems like he is. I mean, I've never met him. Yeah, he'll have a following. I mean, he certainly has a following now. Hillary Clinton, I'm sure. Well, I'm not sure, but I would suspect is going to run. But look, I don't. I think Chris Christie, I mean, seems to have a following as someone who, might be able to actually be at the center of the discussion and is not as polarizing as the other two people I just mentioned, although I think he might have a hard time getting the Republican nomination at this point, just given where the Republican electorate seems to be, at least in the early voting states. And so, yeah, there's three people whose name I'm sure you've heard a million times before and that I'm not telling you anything new about. But yeah, I also think that there could be someone that we're not even thinking about now, that we don't even know about now. So.
See, there was another hand up here. Oh, right in front here.
Yeah. Two hands up in front.
Just thank you so much for your insights. I have two questions. The first is, you sort of mentioned the alternative to the rottenness is people who know themselves, or if they don't know themselves, at least they know a place, and they have some sort of rudeness in the world, in the world being outside of Washington in the bubble. And my question to that is, what sector of society, or is there different, can you point to education, can you point to parents, what can you point to develop that in people who may grow up and actually make a change and bring healing to rottenness? Yeah. And then the second question is, in a society where politics is working as it should work, and we're talking about America, so in society where politics is working correctly in America, what is the role of the media? What ought it to do, and what should it do, and how does that compare and contrast with what it's currently doing?
Good questions. I mean, I would say, first off, I mean, there's any number of places one can go for rootedness, whether it's in a faith community, whether it's in a school community, in some kind of education. And by the way, I mean, I should say this. This can happen in Washington, too. I mean, I know a lot of, I think, rooted people in Washington. And unfortunately, the people I wrote about in the book are the people who are yelling at themselves, yelling at each other on television about the people who are being furloughed who are not in the book. I mean, a dozen men and women, lost their lives 2 weeks ago at the Navy Yard. And these are very much citizens rooted in Washington, the life of Washington, D.C. They're not in this book. That no one, that doesn't go on TV, and so I mean they are everywhere. I mean I think it's actually just it's something that every individual has to know about. I just think that when you're in Washington, and I am, you learn hopefully to be vigilant about what your motivations are, who your real friends are. I think it's a place where you need to work a little bit harder to pick who your friends are, because it is such a soup of opportunism, especially when I mean, in my case, you belong to a major organization. You just sort of wonder, what are people's motives for talking to you, and do they really want to be my kid's friend, or do they just want to, influence a story I'm writing in the New York Times? As far as the role of the press, I mean, look, I would just love to see an end to the carnival barking and just the contest to see who can yell louder and who can put out the most outrageous opinions. And look, I mean, the press has not been a clean or organized or, certainly a perfect operation through our entire history. I just wish it would calm down a little bit. I wish it would sort of take a deep breath. I would love there to be less of a premium on speed and more of a premium on thoughtfulness, and maybe a fuller discussion before people actually speak or write stories and so forth.
So it's 1:40, and we need to cut this off, but I just have one last question. Yeah. In your acknowledgments, you start out thanking some of the New York Times execs and you say you run the best newspaper in the world, but more important, you know what matters.
Yeah.
What matters?
Well, in my case, and that was a very personal thing. I mean, I've in my time at the Times, my wife has had cancer, and my daughter's been sick, and they've helped me to get through some very, very difficult, personal stuff, and I can't thank them enough. I mean, it's been an incredibly generous place for me to, juggle, those challenges with my work and also writing the book. So that's what I'm writing about there. So
Gotcha.
I also want to say, just before we go, I just want to thank everyone. This has been really great, and hope you'll read the book. But more importantly, I really appreciate being welcomed here, and hope I can come back someday. So thanks.
We're delighted to have you, and you're welcome anytime.
Great.
Let me thank everybody for coming, those who've been tuning in on our webcast also. And let me remind you that although this concludes this week's episode of the Olasky Newsmaker interview series, there's another episode coming up in early November, I think, November 6th. I think you'll be back here on this stage. Marvin Olasky and his wife Susan will be freshly back from Africa the day before, so they might be a little jet lagged during the first interview. Actually, I'll be with them in Africa on that trip. But there's a whole new cast of characters, so tune in then. Thanks a lot. God bless.